You're gonna kill him.
That didn't get you fired up, I don't know what will. I'm Lisa Bosley, I'm from the Department of English and Theater, and I'm the QEP co-director along with Dr. Jill Parrott, who's also with us today, and I want to thank you all for coming. Some of you have been here at our last session, so I appreciate it that you came back. That's going to motivate me to get through this session. So take a minute, you'll notice I had two questions. What do you notice and what do you wonder about? And so if you'll just take a minute and jot down a couple of responses to those questions. What do you notice and what do you wonder about? We'll get started. So, what did you notice? What did you notice and what do you wonder about? What did you notice as you came in?
As we came in?
Yeah, or now.
Or
yeah.
So the dramatic music and the slow motion scene and the film shots of the stairs.
Okay, nice. What else did you notice?
Your goodies in the back.
QEP swag in the back. Please help yourself. Good. Yeah, what else?
I know you started on time.
Good. Okay. Good.
I was late.
Okay. Anybody else? Or what you wonder about?
I'm sorry, my mind went straight to politics. It has nothing to do with this.
Your mind was wandering or you were making a connection?
No, I mean, whenever I saw those directions, I thought it was supposed to be answering those questions related to reading, or related to the film clip, life in general.
Good questions. Okay.
And I went straight to life in general.
Okay. Good questions. Anybody else? Did anybody wonder why I was playing the scene from Rocky? Okay.
I thought it meant that we were supposed to like really beat our students.
There you go. Yeah.
Punch them in the stomach and those
Okay.
are things.
Do push-ups.
Right.
Eat
Yeah, that's
dead
right.
meat.
Exercise so you read well.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. Good. What motivates you? What motivates you to read something you might not want to read? Think about that for a minute. What motivates you to read things you might not want to read?
Well, for me, it's like that desire to build my knowledge base.
Okay.
Also, when I was a student, and even now, you don't want to let other people down. I mean, to me,
Okay.
it was like, I didn't want to seem, quote, dumb,
Okay.
unquote,
Yeah.
when I was a student, yeah.
Fear,
Fear,
insecurity.
yeah. Shame and fear.
Okay, desire to learn. So my disclaimer here is that I don't have a secret for how to motivate students to read. I have no silver bullet, and so we're going to try to work through what some of the research says about. Oops, wrong one. Sorry, let me back up. We are going to work through some theories and some ideas, but first of all, to think about what is it that. How do we make ourselves read something that we don't want to read? And I guess the idea is that it's really hard sometimes, right, to read what we don't want to read. And that idea is that reading is slow, hard work. It can be boring. It can be very frustrating if I don't get most of what's on the page. I don't really want to do it because it's so hard. It can make me feel dumb. and it can seem irrelevant. And I don't need to do the reading to be successful in class, possibly. Doyle, whose research, I have a list of references at the end of your handouts for lots of the things that I'll be talking about today. And the handouts are in order, so if you keep them relatively in order, it'll be easier to refer to them. But Doyle said in his research, the nearly unanimous answer, and this comes from some very highly motivated and bright learners, is that students don't read the material because they feel confident that the teacher is going to cover all the material in class. And so why bother? And they often add the comment, and I love this, that teachers generally love to talk. And so the teacher's going to be doing most of the work in class, so I really don't need to do the reading. He also noted, though, that most students don't read because they don't know how to read. They don't know how to read in the way that we're expecting them to read. And so our objectives, I'm spatially challenged, so we're going to review theories of student motivation and self-efficacy and discuss strategies to motivate students, hopefully, to want to do the reading. I've been reading this book called Small Teaching by James Lang. Is anybody familiar? Has anybody read any of this? And it's actually his idea to get to class a little bit early, although I do this too, and maybe you do too, to get to class early and start with a video, a film clip, of great quotation, some kind of an image on the screen, and to ask students, what do you notice and what do you wonder about? And so I think that is a great way to start class. His book is, it's an approach that seeks to spark positive change through small but important modifications in our class. And so the book is filled with ideas for 10-minute activities that can spark enthusiasm and interest, brief learning activities, one-time interventions, and small modifications. His justification is that doing these kinds of things, starting with this kind of film clip, this was my hope with you all, though it seemed to fall a little flat, as things sometimes do in our classes, is that it activates prior knowledge. It might have sparked some great memory you had of going on a date to see Rocky or watching it with your dad. But the idea is to tap into students' emotions. And Lang reviews research that talks about the importance of the subjective value, and I guess this is the intrinsic value, right? What's in this for me? Why am I interested in learning this? And then expectancies. How is working on this and practicing this going to lead to positive outcomes for me? He also cites new work by Sarah Kavanaugh, and this is also listed in your references, whose meta-study of learning in higher education points to research that focuses on emotion, the motivating force to drive learners under the right circumstances, she says. We all experience faltering motivation in our work. Some of you may be experiencing that this week. It's a tough time in the semester. I know I'm feeling pretty exhausted, and maybe you are too. And so what's going to keep us motivated to do our best work throughout the semester? And so Lang asks, how can I elicit and work with the emotions already present in the classroom to give students frequent motivational boost throughout the semester? Okay, and he focuses on 3 key elements of research on emotions and learning. So how can we use emotion to capture attention, to help key into self-transcendent purpose, so what goes beyond me, and to create enthusiasm through social connections. So how do we use emotion to capture attention then? And he suggests, through videos, great stories. You all probably have great stories of key discoveries in your field, things that excited you when you first encountered these new ideas and how you're learning them. But also helping students tap into what they already know about a topic. So, for example, in first year writing, many of us teach Martin Luther King Jr.'s Letter from Birmingham Jail as a way to help students practice critical reading and rhetorical analysis. And so I always start out by asking students, what do you already know about Martin Luther King? And they generally know the I Have a Dream speech. They know he was a civil rights leader. They know a few things about him. And so I asked them what they know about the Birmingham protest of 1963, and they may know a little bit about that, but then I'll show the video of the grainy footage of the police officers attacking very dignified protesters with water hoses and with police dogs. And it's very stark and powerful. So then we'll do some reading of the text together in class. We might read a couple of paragraphs together, annotating as we go, me modeling my thinking as I'm reading the first couple of paragraphs of Letter from Birmingham Jail. Excuse me. Asking them to share their annotations with each other. And then before I end the class and I assign them to finish Letter from Birmingham Jail for the next class, and it's a very lengthy and complex text, I'll show them this video, and I'll ask them to think about, and I'll ask you to think about, what gives King moral authority? What gives him moral authority, and what do you notice about his rhetorical strategies? It's just a 2.5.
To America is be true to what you said on paper. If I lived in China or even Russia or any totalitarian country, maybe I could understand some of these illegal injunctions. Maybe I could understand the denial of certain basic First Amendment privileges because they haven't committed themselves to that over there. But somewhere I read of the freedom of assembly. Somewhere I read of the freedom of speech. Somewhere I read of the freedom of press. Somewhere I read that the greatness of America is the right to protest far right. And so just as I say we aren't going to let any dogs or water hoses turn us around, we aren't going to let any injunction turn us around. Well, I don't know what will happen now. We've got some difficult days ahead. But it really doesn't matter with me now because I've been to the mountaintop. Like anybody, I would like to live a long life. Longevity has its place. But I'm not concerned about that now. I just want to do God's will. And He's allowed me to go up to the mountain. And I've looked over and I've seen the promised land. I may not get there with you, but I want you to know tonight that we as a people will get to the promised land. So I'm happy tonight. I'm not worried about anything. I'm not fearing any man. Mine eyes have seen the glory of the coming of the Lord.
So what gives King moral authority? And that's, of course, what I want them to be thinking about when they're reading this speech for homework the next day. What do they notice about his rhetoric? What gives his speech moral authority? And usually that passage makes me cry. I always tell my students that I would listen to it with my kids, and I would always cry when we would listen to it. So I want you to think for a minute. What do you do in your class to capture students' emotions, to tap into the emotions in whatever your subject is, and maybe to tap into the emotion that you feel when you're teaching that subject? And then after you do that, we'll all stand up and have a group hug. I'm just joking. No, but really what I want you to do now is I would like you to stand up, and I'd like you to introduce yourself to somebody that you don't know, and just share an idea, something that you're doing in your class that you think does what I'm trying to do here, to tap into my students' emotion, to get them excited about reading Letter from Birmingham Jail. Go ahead and take about 3 or 4 minutes and just introduce yourself to somebody you don't know and share an idea from your class that's working well to elicit emotion. I hate to interrupt your good conversations, but I will. You'll come back together. I'd like to ask someone to share a story or to share an idea from your partner, somebody who thought your partner had a good idea. Sorry to interrupt you all. Good conversations. I'd like to ask somebody to share a good idea from their partner, something that you heard you thought, oh, that's good.
I'll share one.
Okay.
Yes, we were talking about how emotion, it is good, and when I used to teach, I used it to capture students' attention.
Mhm.
But I was talking to her about a novel that I used to teach way back when I taught, called Bastard Out of Carolina.
Mhm.
And that book really stressed students out. And they would come to me and say, I can't deal with thinking about this book because I feel overwhelmed by the emotions. And then Sarah was talking about how, there are studies that show that you have to kind of walk a fine line between the kind of emotion that you're introducing students to, because if it's too negative, correct me if I'm wrong, Miss Sarah, if it's too negative, they'll remember the emotion, but they might not remember anything about the subject or what you were trying to teach.
That's a really good point. We have those sort of trigger things that we have to think about. Good. Anybody else want to share their partners? Okay. You want to share her idea?
This is so good.
Well, tell us. Okay.
Well, Cindy, you teach in health sciences. I'm trying to retain as much from our conversation as possible. But she talks about different body systems and the top 3 diseases that people die from, and asked that of her student audience. What are the top 3? What do you think the top 3 diseases are that would affect this body system, cause death? And then sharing statistics.
Yeah, I asked them if they've been affected by it and if they're willing to share, so they can get personal. And like we just finished talking about AIDS, and it's on the rise again, and for the first time in a long time, and because of drug use, and this one was particularly powerful because I had a lot of interaction, believe it or not, and but we also talked about, and it kind of spurs like what kind of behavior leads to the disease. So you can really get into what's causing it, the pathology behind it, what you can do to cure it, how you can change your behaviors, and but I make comments like, and I know this is silly, but it kind of drives home. Like, I'm a lot older than my students, obviously, and I told them in today's age, I said I would have probably, this would have scared me straight. I would have married a virgin, I've been a virgin, and because 60% of the people, we're talking about hepatitis, and 60% of the population in the U.S. actually test positive for it at some point, have the antibodies in their blood system. And when you think about it and how it's passed on, they just don't think about all the diseases they're exposing themselves to. One girl told me she was never having sex again. She can't do my job.
Fear. Yeah, the great motivator is fear. Okay.
Just contact. So I just get them involved in that way.
And making those personal connections. Good.
And they're talking about themselves. So I'm not trying to teach them. They're talking about it personal. And I use that experience to kind of build on.
Okay, nice. And so that kind of leads to the second element, which is this idea of self-transcendent purpose. And I was actually surprised. I read in this really interesting study by Yeager and his colleagues, his or her, that says, and the title of it is Boring But Important. And it's about how to motivate people to read boring but important things, which reminds me of the conversation I had with Lynette Noblet at your session on multimodal presentations, where we were talking about things about using visuals and audio to motivate students. And Lynette said, who teaches in the government program and law, that what about the things that are really boring that you have to read, the law briefs, the case studies that are tedious and difficult to get through. So these folks kind of address that idea. How do you help students get through boring but important material? And they said the most powerful form they found in their research of purposefulness exists when students see the ability of their learning to make the world a better place. Which I teach a lot of 18-year-olds, and so they all seem pretty self-centered, So to me that didn't quite, but I think as students mature and they begin to see their ability to, how is their career in sociology, in nursing, in physics going to help other people in the world, help them achieve their purpose. And so it's important that we invoke purpose often in our assignments, in our reading assignments. Students need regular reminders of the larger purposes of individual exercises, of readings that you're assigning. How is it tied to the course objectives? How is it going to help students achieve the goals of the course and to achieve their personal goals? And having them stop to reflect on that from time to time is important. In the opening or closing minutes, I remember when Charlie Sweet observed me as a young professor and said, I need to always start class with my objectives. What am I hoping to achieve? Instead of just coming in and launching into your lecture or your activities or whatever they are. In the opening and closing minutes, remind students where we've been, where we are now, where we're going, and why. And what I've been finding lately, an idea I stole from someone, is now I start class by asking, instead of me coming in and saying, on Wednesday we talked about blah, 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 and today we're going to do this, and this is moving us ahead to this assignment, occasionally I'll have them get out the syllabus and say, think about what we did on Wednesday and take a few minutes and write down what you remember about Wednesday's class. How is it tied to the course objectives? Why were we working on that? If a student was absent on Wednesday, what would you tell that student we did that was important or interesting? And then look at the class schedule, the schedule of assignments. What do you think we're going to be working on today? And how is it tied to upcoming assignments? So instead of me doing the work, I have them doing the work, and then I'll ask a few people, I'll call on a few people to share. What have we been doing? Why are we doing it? How is it tied to the course objectives? And I've been finding that works really well. So it seems like in all of our QEP sessions, we come back to these three questions, right? Why did you assign the reading? What do you expect students to read? How do you expect students to read it? And what will you ask them to do with the reading? So I want to spend some time here working on those questions, especially the how do we expect students to read and what do we expect them to do with it. So you want to take time to sell students on the readings, to preview the readings, to drum up anticipation, maybe through some bells and whistles, maybe through videos, images, important quotations, a story about somebody who made a key discovery in your field. And also take time to help students understand the nature of what it is that you're reading. So Linda Nilsson, who has several books on teaching at its best, says your students aren't familiar with academic publications and you need to help them, especially with textbooks, see all the parts of that textbook. I've had students halfway through the semester who discovered, oh, there's an index in this book, or there's a glossary in this book. Well, I should have helped them discover that earlier in the semester. So she says we need to give them a road map. Why send them into foreign territory without a map? For example, in the readings that we do in English 101, there's a head note usually for the author, right? And so, who is Maya Angelou? When was she born? What did she write? What awards has she won? And it was halfway through the semester I realized that many students didn't realize the head note was written by the editor. They thought it was part of what Maya Angelou had written. So even something as simple as parts of a textbook and how they work can be important to point out to students. Also then, the social aspect. So creating enthusiasm through social connections. What kinds of things are you doing in your classes to, have opportunities for pairing and sharing or for small group activity? Some of you, I know our classes are very different. How many of you teach classes that are, say, 25 people, 25 to 30 people or less? And does anybody have like huge lecture classes?
Define huge.
I don't know, 50 people, 75, 100? You do? What's the biggest class you would
We're usually around 50.
have? Okay,
By
so,
the time they get to their last semester.
okay, but it sounds like a lot of us have those sort of 25 students in the classroom. I'm going to ask you again to be social and to stand up, introduce yourself to somebody you don't know, and just share one activity that you do in your class. Maybe that's not the run-of-the-mill thing, to encourage students, to encourage that social interaction and achieve your objectives at the same time. So take about 3 or 4 minutes and do that.
Different person.
Different person. Yeah, find a different person. Again, you all have having good conversations. I hate to interrupt. If you'll come back together. And I want to ask again if someone will share an idea from their partner. Maybe you thought, hey, that's a good idea. I need to try that.
I will. I'm always like the first to volunteer. Okay, so I was talking to Jackie, and she is a history professor, and she was talking about how to get students interested in history when they, it was called the Pharaoh's Desktop, and students would have to take a pharaoh from a certain era of Egyptian history, and put together what they thought his desk would look like.
Oh, that's
So
fun.
that would
Okay.
be interesting.
And is there a social component to that?
Yeah, we do it in, and I was telling Kathy, I actually borrowed this from a teacher over at Model High School who teaches Egypt and has developed a whole semester-long class on Egypt over there, and who had me go over and present in his class. And so it's that borrowing from the kind of standard science fair technique, where I have half the class present their desktop on one day. They come in, they set it up, and they stand beside their desktop. The other half of the class circulates around and asks them questions, and they have to present why they chose to do their desktop as
Okay.
they did.
Oh, nice. And so students like that. I mean, they like the opportunity to get to know people in their class and get to
So
talk to each other.
I'm not gonna share, Ben, with your permission.
Yeah,
Right.
that's fine.
So, what I realized when I was talking to Ben, my background is mostly ESL and public relations and media, which, when you're talking about PR media, it's pretty easy to get students excited about those two subjects. He was talking about anthropology and biology as a gen ed course, and I realized in our discussion how daunting that would be for a professor to have a gen ed course that gets into such complicated materials and trying to motivate students who have absolutely no connection
Yes.
whatsoever
Okay.
to the subject matter.
Okay.
And so that's what he shared with me as how overwhelming that can be.
Uh-huh.
You know, and I mean, honestly, you know, it sounds great in principle to say create enthusiasm through social connections and all that. I'm actually having to deal with stuff that I have to go through that they've never had before, but they need to have in order to do well. And when I say they haven't had it before, it's been glossed over in high schools and talking evolutionary biology and genetics.
Okay.
And so when you introduce a topic that is actually, I mean, the whole course is going to be, you know, at some level, if a student doesn't have either the math training or any of the science training, and of course, you know, I think Garrett and I would agree that, you know, in terms of science phobias, I mean, they're real too.
Okay.
And so there's a level of sensitivity that, you know, you have to admit to, but you have to get through the basics as well, right?
Well, I deal with that. Well, I haven't taught astronomy for a long time, but when I did teach astronomy, it was you have students in there who think it's just going to be memorizing names of stars.
Yeah.
And science, you know, it's so much richer than that, and I want to deliver that, but they have no interest, you know, in something, you know, Newton's laws of motion. They don't understand how dealing with, you know, those equations is going to help them understand kind of the bigger picture and what's really so exciting about astronomy. And it, you know, all the enthusiasm in that course is whatever I bring into the room with me.
Right.
And it just feels like it's sucking energy out of you. You don't get it it's very hard to get any of that reflected back.
Right.
Okay.
And then also to bring in the reading component to
Right.
it as well, it's like one more aspect that sucks. Not that it sucks, but it sucks the energy.
Okay. Okay. Good. These are good points. Yeah, Sarah.
I was wondering if you could turn that into your advantage, in the sense of like, this class is so hard, but then the social connection comes from the class. This is so hard that we're all helping each other in this class. So I noticed that in one of my I'm in the new Blackboard in the Trailblazer, and there were a lot of absolute like confusion about the new Blackboard, like students posting things. But what I noticed through the discussion, this is online, so it's a little different, but through the discussion was, I think I've never had a class, so we can do this, we are all in this together, we can, it was things like where to click to do this or that, right? Like I understand science approaches are more difficult, but I wonder if you can switch. I do that, I also teach stats with psych majors, which is the only class they hate in a psych degree. So it's kind of like, you're all in this together, this is really hard, but you turn it around with how hard it is and how difficult is the material, it helps them be more closer together rather than bring them apart, if that makes sense.
Oh yeah, and there are different ways to do that in a lab setting, and you know, I think that's one way I try to go about doing it.
I think anyone who teaches a class that has student fear connected to it, and that's sciences and math almost always, yeah, it's tough. It's tough to get
Well, let's talk about that then. I mean, I know that you all are right, you know, about we can bring all this enthusiasm, and certainly things that we know about self-efficacy and students' beliefs about their abilities to deal with the challenges in their course is directly tied to their reading behaviors, cognitive processes, reading motivation. So how do we help students then embrace the difficulty and believe that you know, we're all going to do this together. We can overcome this challenge. We can climb the steps of the Philadelphia Art Museum. And so I think I'll sort of just gloss over this and get down more to the nitty-gritty of the reading, but I'm sure that you all have some sense of, you know, what helps students feel efficacious, I guess, is that knowing that they can succeed. How do we create mastery experiences in the class? Little bits where, yeah, students are overwhelmed by the information, but we help them succeed early in the class. They see other people succeeding, and that builds this sense of community, I think. And through encouragement from other people, you know, Rocky's guys telling him you're going to kill him, and then keying into their emotional and psychological states. So how to significantly increase, taking what we know from the research about motivation, how can we significantly increase students' reading? And by teaching them how to read in our discipline. Jill and I talk about this in all of our workshops. How do we teach students how to read like a sociologist, like a psychologist, like a historian? We need to make our reading practices visible and encourage students to persist, to embrace difficulty, and to demonstrate and promote the use of metacognitive strategies. Those of you who have been to our workshops, and I know several of you have, we talk a lot about previewing text. Is anybody doing that? Is it working for you to spend time helping students connect to the topic, to activate what they already know, and to begin to make those personal connections, the kind of thing that Cindy, right, was talking about earlier? Has anybody tried any of those things? If you look in your handouts, the first handout that you have is our kind of standard Read with Purpose handout, and it has some classroom activities for ideas about previewing text with students and helping them form some kind of connection, even if it's something that they maybe have only heard about or only vaguely know. The other thing that we talk a lot about in our sessions is making your reading process visible by thinking aloud. And so early in the semester and throughout the semester, demonstrating your reading process by previewing the text with the students and spending a little bit of time thinking aloud. And I wasn't planning to spend much time on that today because we talk about it a lot, but you do have a handout that describes planning to introduce think aloud, and then planning to introduce talking to the text, by which we mean annotation. So early in the semester, spending time with students, modeling your thinking process as you read a paragraph, having students annotate the text, sharing your annotations, asking them to share their annotations with each other. What did you think was interesting or important? What did you mark as surprising or confusing? And there are some guidelines for annotating, something that I hand out to my students. I always have 95% of my freshmen say, no one ever taught me how to annotate. I've never even heard of it before. Hopefully that's changing and high schools begin to teach students to annotate. But you know, in high school, the first time my daughter saw me, well, my daughter was 3 or 4 years old, and she saw me writing in a book, and she went, oh, you can't do that. You can't, you know, and our students all throughout high school, they're not allowed to write in their books, right? And when they get here, I mean, some of them have these expensive textbooks, maybe they can't write in their textbooks. I tell them to get big sticky notes with lines, and my books that I can't write in are full of sticky notes with lines with my notes in them. But we need to teach students how to read like a scholar, right? How to make notes as they read. And it's that interaction in their annotation that makes them read actively. But they don't know how to do it, and we need to tell them, and we don't need to just tell them at the beginning of the semester, but to repeat it throughout the semester. Have them share their annotations and text with each other, and to continue to demonstrate our annotations. There's also a little survey or reflective activity on the back of that handout that I will give to my students periodically, where I have them self-assess their annotations. What's working well? What do they not know about it? What are they confused about? The next handout then is, and what do we want students to do with the reading? We talk a lot about classroom preparation assignments, and I'm sure you all have different versions of classroom preparation assignments. I did want to mention from Owen's research, and again, you have the reference on your reference sheet, but she was teaching in an upper level criminal justice class, and she tried 3 interventions with students and found from their self-reports that they said overwhelmingly that they motivated students to read their text more actively, or even just to read them at all. But she had 3 basic, or 3 different approaches. One was to assign basic comprehension or literal factual questions for the reading, right? So students have to answer 5 questions from their reading. We've all done that. But what she did that was different, that I thought was interesting, is when students came in the next day with their 5 questions answered, they had to share them with a partner, and the partners evaluated the questions. And then the partner had to actually fill in the missing information for that student. And then they would talk about them. So the social pressure of knowing that you're going to share the answers to your questions with a partner in class, and they're going to grade your responses based on a rubric, I think she found was highly motivating. She did the same thing with a more complex classroom preparation assignment, which was that students had to write summaries of research articles. So they had to write a 1-paragraph summary of a research article. Same thing, when they came to class the next day, they had to share their article summaries and critique their article summaries according to a rubric with a partner. And then she also did a more complex one where she asked students to respond to a prompt about the reading of a research article by constructing a 1-page argument based on textual evidence. And they had to, were asked to present oral summaries of their position and evidence in class. Again, that kind of social pressure. So knowing that they're going to be asked to do something with the reading, right? You're not going to do all the lecture and summing up of the reading. You're going to ask them to do things with the reading. And the next handout that you have, it says classroom preparation assignment at the top. Some of you all have heard me talk about this one before, so if this is a repeat, you can pass this on to a colleague maybe. But I really like the difficulty paper idea, and this kind of gets at, I think, what Sarah was saying. And you'll notice this is an idea that you get students to write about the difficulty that they encounter in their text. And I like to do this early in the semester. And my favorite part is toward the end of that paragraph where it says, my goal in this assignment is to move all of us from judging a difficulty as a reader's inability to understanding a text to discerning in the difficulty a reader's incipient awareness of the challenges of that disciplinary reading, right? This is like reading this sociology textbook is hard, and at times it's tedious, and at times it's boring. This is how I read it as a sociologist. This is how I expect you to read it as a student of sociology. And then there's another example of a CPA from another study from a professor who teaches sociology. And he has some ideas for having students come prepared, having read that material. So feel free to stop me at any time with questions or comments. There's also there's 2 more examples of classroom preparation assignments. One is again from a teaching sociology journal, and you'll see I just copied 1 page of it. It has some good ideas for this professor, Roberts. They give their students 5 choices. If you kind of flip through there, you can see the A, B, C, D, and E. And they have a choice of how they're going to respond to that reading assignment. And he does this 25 times throughout the semester. And they also have some suggestions for very quick grading. You know, you just give a point and you give points for effort. So it shouldn't be something that's going to take up a whole lot of your time to read and respond to, but just giving points for doing it. I also really like this article by Terry Tomasek. It's called Critical Reading, Using Reading Prompts to Promote Active Engagement with Text. And this was something that Jill and I worked with occupational sciences faculty last semester, and I think Leslie Hardman found this article. And what I really like about it are the questions, the types of reading prompts. And if you flip through that, you can see that they're organized according to different concepts. Identification of problems or issues, making connections, interpretation of evidence. This person is a education professor, so it pertains to that. But I think that the prompts are very good, and such a variety of them that could be adapted to really any teaching situation. The next thing are graphic organizers. Do you all assign graphic organizers to your students? It looks like this. You do, Beth? What kinds of?
We do a lot of concept mapping.
Okay, good.
In nursing, we have a theoretical framework called the nursing process to help you look at every care process of that patient. So we often will take a diagnosis or take a concept and have them write it out through the nursing process and use that as a concept mapping.
Excellent. Okay, so yeah, I have examples of graphic organizers here, which are just visual ways to organize your thinking and to organize information that can be really useful for students. And so you can see some examples here that, compare and contrast, or trace causes and effects, or problems and solutions. So different types of graphic organizers. Of course, you have to understand, or you have to, deliberately think about. Of course, you understand the structure of your text. What is it that you're assigning, and how is it organized in order to create a good assignment for using graphic organizers? You see your next handout is a concept map of concept maps. And so I'm going to ask you to look at that just for a minute. It looks like this. A concept map of concept maps. And so the concepts are in the circles, or the boxes. And the lines are about relationships, right? And the words on the lines are about relationships between and among concepts. I'm going to ask you all to explain to me what's infants? Do you see infants down here in the lower left quadrant of the concept map? Can somebody explain why the word infants is there, or the concept infants is there? Somebody have an idea? I see a smile. I just thought that word seemed so incongruous for me. It took me a while to figure out what infants was. Anybody want to try?
My guess is that also meaning infancy, like the beginning of any learning process, or
Okay.
linguistic process,
Okay.
thought process, knowledge process.
Okay, I finally came to that. Yeah, that infants perceive it begins with infants perceiving regularities of patterns, and that's where creativity also begins for us as human beings, okay? Well, I want you to, so other people using concept maps? Okay, think about it as a way, it's something that students can do with their reading, that you assign them to create a concept map of whatever it is that you're having them read, whether it's, if you've assigned chapter 12, and chapter 12 is 35 pages long, students aren't going to read all 35 pages for Wednesday, right? There's no possible way. What's the key information in that chapter you really want them to focus on? So maybe find a 4-page segment or a 3-page segment and assign them to create a concept map for homework, and then when they come in, they're going to share their concepts in small groups, and then maybe as a group come up with the best concept map. And so I want you to practice that now. I'm going to put you to work, and with your next handout, which is, again, Garrett Yoder's contribution to this session, which is an excerpt from an astronomy textbook that he's used here at Eastern. It looks like this. Okay. And I'm going to assign, we might not finish this activity, but we'll get started. I'm going to assign 3 groups. One group, I want you to draw a concept map. And of course, you haven't had time to read this for homework. So I'm imagining that you can kind of skim this and get an idea. Or we'll work on it for 5 or 6 minutes and see how much you can accomplish. One group, I want you to make a concept map of everything you know about this topic. Okay? And you're going to be at the whiteboard back here. Group 1, I want you to make a concept map of everything that you can glean from this first section, the Milankovitch climate cycles hypothesis. So you start on your concept map over here. And the third group, Milankovitch climate cycles evidence, you're going to map out everything you can glean from that section of text. So how about if the 4 of you will be the first group, everything you know about this topic? And how about the 3 of you be the second group? And you all are going to work. This is great. So, how might this activity be helpful in your class? I'm sorry that we didn't have enough time, and maybe next time I'll spend more time with us doing this. But how might this be useful in your class? And if you think about the theories about motivation, how does this tie into that?
Well, you can use it as a good activity, but first you gotta present some of the concepts.
Mm-hmm.
And this is what I find. We've got a lot of issues, at least in nursing, we're trying to do a lot of flipped classroom.
Right. Yeah.
But we're expecting, see, like today, I know nothing about astronomy. I'm
Right.
lucky to even know where the star, I'm just gonna find my way home at night. Okay, so this is way out of my league.
Well, like
The fact that
Ben's
I get up and
students,
just
right?
try to read 2 paragraphs, I'm
Yes.
feeling very lost, and I'm also feeling under pressure
Mhm.
because I'm having to perform in front of others.
Okay, good
Like
point.
insecure, because
Exactly.
yes, I was
I know
real
nothing
insecure.
about this. So
Well,
I've got students
okay.
that are being presented brand new concepts
Right.
that they don't understand.
Right.
And if we haven't, they can try to read it in a textbook, but again, if you don't have someone to help you put it into context,
Right.
like me, they're lost out here.
Okay, well, those are good points, and certainly I would, of course, we would have spent time previewing in class. We would have annotated together, we would have gone through these steps. So I definitely put you all on the spot. And I also have been doing this thing where, I don't think I already said this, having students fess up. So if I was planning this activity in class on Wednesday, we had done previewing, we had gone over some concepts, they did the reading for homework, then I would ask students when they came in, how many of you didn't get a chance to do the reading last night? Because you're not really going to be able to contribute to this group activity. And I always have 2 or 3 students who say, my mom was in the hospital, I didn't. So without shaming anybody, I say, okay, you 3 people go sit over there and you do the reading. The rest of you who are prepared, we're going to do this group activity. We're going to take your concept maps that you've already worked on. So yeah, I would not put people on the spot
So
as
then
he
here's my
suggested.
question.
Yeah.
What do you do when it's 90% of your class that didn't read?
That's what I'm afraid
Well,
of.
so what I'm
So much
hoping,
reading.
is that through these activities that we're working on, that you're, making your purpose clearer, your expectations are clearer, that students will do the reading. They know they're going to do things in the reading, and you hold them accountable. 40% of my grade in first year writing is daily activities, okay? So if they know that a big chunk of their grade, there's that extrinsic motivation. If your own enthusiasm doesn't carry them along, you have to hold them accountable for doing the reading. And we talk about that in our other workshops as well. Also, of course, to do concept maps well, you have to understand the structure of the text and how the concepts are linked to yourself, right?
Yeah,
So it forces you.
But it gave me the opposite reaction because I felt that sense of mastery that I could take. We had the second one, which I think was a little easier, and highlight. Okay, what is the critical information here?
Mhm.
What can I pull out, and what can I ignore? And I felt a sense that I could actually do that, even though I had no idea what it was actually.
Okay, but you all did figure out pretty quickly that there were 2 things that were being compared,
Yeah,
right?
and
2
so
different.
just the fact that I could identify that gave me
Right.
that sense that okay, I can actually do this.
Right. And so certainly you would want to demonstrate the use of concept maps before you assign students to do it. Maybe you would map out a concept as a way to introduce a concept. So there's lots of scaffolding that goes into this kind of activity. And you can also then use concept maps just for once you've taught students how to use them, you've demonstrated them, you've walked through how you would do a concept map. Some ideas for focus questions are you could, what are the reasons for the financial crisis? demonstrate the positive and negative consequences of this. This is one that I do often. What's the thesis of the essay, and what evidence does the author use to construct her argument? And so to actually have students map out or draw a picture of the argument that's, you know, in this essay. How do the research methods reflect the researcher's purpose? So all those questions that we tend generally to ask. How can you help students draw a picture? But again, certainly demonstrating that yourself. So I know that we're out of time. I really appreciate you all coming. And you will get a survey from the Teaching and Learning Center asking for your feedback. We really appreciate your feedback. Jill and I